if you had to have a De'Aaron Fox, DeMar DeRozan, Sabonis big three, I'm not sure how much better you can do than Keon Ellis and Keegan Murray.
I agree with you. The problem here, again, that's why I said the Westbrook thing, and this is going to be the problem that we see repeatedly, is like DeMar DeRozan is going to get 100% of the credit if they're good. Like, it's not going to be like, oh yeah, and Keegan Murray and Keon Ellis, they've just been balling out of like it's going to go 100% to DeMar DeRozan. They're going to say, well, last year they had Harrison Barnes, this year they have DeMar DeRozan. Well, look at here, they were better this year, and that's what it means. That's going to be the conversation, 100%. So. This is a new series we call Hot Hand Minis. These are going to be shorter form pod episodes where Geoff and I get together to discuss one single topic. And for this one, we're going to dive right in. Geoff, you were inspired by some of the conversation on social media about a theoretical Randle for, I believe it was PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford deal, but most of the discussion really centered around Randle and PJ and how they each would fit Dallas's roster. Do you want to set up the conversation a little bit from your perspective, Geoff? Because you kind of clued me into it. And, you mentioned that how it's a perfect conversation for some concepts this show has been discussing from the very beginning of Hot Hand Theory. So I think it's only right that you kind of cue it up.
Yeah, I thought that, first of all, I want to say, because our audience right now is a lot of Knicks fans, I thought that a lot of the backlash the trade got, specifically regarding PJ Washington replacing Julius Randle, was justified. I thought that, I went over this on Twitter. I think it's very clear that Julius Randle is a level high enough above PJ Washington that whatever fit concerns are prevalent on both teams don't really matter. You just take the impact and live with the suboptimal fit in this case. But that's not really interesting to me. We're not, breaking new ground saying that Julius Randle is better than PJ Washington. And this isn't like hating on PJ Washington. Washington's a good player. He does things well. He's a good, versatile defender. He's a better defender than Randle, honestly, even though Randle's maybe more switchable. I think PJ Washington's a better overall team defender. He's a better rim protector. People may remember Washington on Charlotte when Charlotte was a little better a few years ago. One of the things they did against that 2022 Knicks team, specifically the one that struggled again with Tibbs coaching, they went to Washington at the 5, and he was very viable as a stretch center. They would go 5 out, and they just destroyed the Knicks. So Washington's a good player. Julius Randle's just an all-star player, and I know that's lazy vacuum analysis, but he is a true all-star level impact player. And so if you're going to move down from an impact perspective in a vacuum, first of all, the impacts need to be closer and the fit needs to be better. And I don't think PJ Washington really checks either of those boxes in the Knicks case. So all this is a long way of saying I empathize with Knicks fans who are just sick of seeing these mock trades on Twitter. And they're like, please stop disrespecting our players. I get it. But I do think the more interesting theoretical discussion involves the idea of this player who profiles like Randle, who maybe struggles to fit with many roster constructions, and then this player like a better version of PJ Washington who more seamlessly fits, and how we're supposed to compare and contrast them, how we're supposed to project their impacts in each team construction. So yeah, I mean, I made that thread on Twitter today, but I really want to talk more about it. I wanted to get your perspective, and I'm really interested to hear what you think about the players and about the situations, and where you stand about how the Knicks about how both teams should operate moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with most of what you said. I do think PJ has a ton of value, especially as a legit stretch 5 in some cases, can do a decent rim protection job, good enough that he more than makes up for it with his shooting at the 5. He's definitely had some up and down seasons with regards to his 3-point shooting, but overall, I think is a better shooter than Randle, and also a better rim protector. But yeah, I agree with you. Randle's just too much of a better player that the degrading of overall value is not going to be sufficiently made up for with PJ's fit in New York. Now, to me, the interesting part is something that you and I talk about a lot, which is, synergy and fit and how that plays relative to value in a vacuum or impact in a vacuum. And so I think that just thinking about the role that Randle plays is just a really interesting and fascinating conversation. It ends up being a lot of our conversations because it's so interesting. And I just think, I guess I would start by saying so the adage of, there's only one ball, I think it's quite literally true that there's only one ball. And I think that, everyone on the court is affecting the game in some way at all times. Every instant of the time that they're on the court, everyone is affecting the game. And the effect is easiest to notice or evaluate of the player with the ball in his hands. We see, the defense shade towards that player to differing degrees, depending on how good their threat level or how good that player is. But there are other factors, like how much of a threat are the guys without the ball, or for lack of a better way to put it, sorry, for some reason, the only way to describe it.
You're going to say it, aren't you?
No, I wasn't going to say it. I wasn't going to say the thing, but this is even worse. I was going to say that the guys without the ball or in their ball-less state is the only way I thought to, but there's going to be a lot more unfortunate references like that in this podcast probably. But yeah, my point is there are a lot of ways to be threatening without the ball, but the higher the likelihood that you score efficiently when you get the ball, the more dangerous you are. So this is kind of the dynamic from where we start our evaluation that I think that people kind of miss. We have to think about what happens when one person has the ball in their hands. Like only one person can have it in their hands at a given time, and 4 players don't. So the threat level from the others on the court make that one person better. And the best example that we all know is Steph Curry. As I always say, his existence on the court makes everyone better because you have to always account for him no matter where he is, and because of how quickly he can get off his shot at a high efficiency shot from anywhere. And so just the mere fact of his existence on the court makes everyone around him better, including the people with the ball in their hands. So I just think that's the first thing that's missed in a lot of evaluations, is that every player is affecting the game and contributing to advantage creation to some extent. Not just the player with the ball, who we like to give the credit for. We say, oh, that player creates a bunch of advantages, but how are they able to create those advantages? One of the reasons is depending on who the off-ball players are, because they open up the court for that player. Okay, so let's say we know all this stuff. This is basic stuff, but now we have to factor in something that you and I talked about kind of recently, Geoff. Offenses have been getting more and more efficient. So that means that the bar for what's an efficient shot is elevated. Defenses will naturally be willing to give up what in the past have seemed like, oh, that's an efficient shot. But now the opportunity cost is lower. So now what a good shot is different, because what a good shot is for the offense is variable. It changes depending on the contextual environment. So like teams will literally, we saw this in the playoffs, teams will literally live with mildly contested corner threes from decent shooters when the alternative is Luka Doncic getting into the paint one-on-one. They're like, yeah, that guy's a pretty good shooter, and he's got a corner three that's like from the short porch in the corner, but the alternative is Luka going one-on-one, so we'll give it to him, right? So you would think no one would give up open corner threes, but that's what happens when the value exchange is what it is. So to me, the conversation really starts from here. I think the value and the importance of a primary initiator is generally, in my opinion, overstated relative to the value conferred by players off the ball. And the relative level of the primary initiator is key because it's also weighted against what else they do well. Like the bar, as we know, is extremely high for primary initiation to be your main strength, and for everything else you do to be relatively weaker. Because even if you're Luka Doncic level, one of the great primary initiators in the game and of the last 10 years, you still have to be good at other things, or your off-ball threats have to be like supremely impactful in those roles. So if you're Julius Randle specifically, you have to be good to great in a lot of other areas that don't include primary initiation, because you're spending so much of your time not doing those things. And so I think that that's the idea, where how somebody who's nowhere near as good as Julius Randle and a PJ Washington, we could even imagine maybe he fits better with Dallas because he's going to confer so much more value off the ball. And Randle's best attribute on the ball, he won't have an opportunity to do that very much. And when he does, he's taking away from other people's best attributes who are much better at it. Kyrie Irving, Luka Doncic, who's probably the best at it in the league. Maybe you could argue Nikola Jokic, but these are some of the elite players at that skill. So this could be a trade where it's like both teams say no, despite this value exchange, given those contexts. So that's the framework for how I think. I know it's a lot, but that's the framework for how I think about the deal, the potential deal.
Yeah, and the last thing you said about what Randle, even when he's doing the things he does best, on a lot of teams, that's taking away from, we talked about this with RJ Barrett all the time. People would say, you're sleeping on what RJ can do. Look at all these things he can do with the ball in his hands. And that's true. He was able to create rim pressure even at a young age that a huge percentage of the league couldn't do. That was a natural gift that he had from, very early on entering this league. People saw that and said, you can't teach this. This is a guy, this is something you want for your offense. But the thing is that when RJ was doing that well, he was taking the ball out of Julius Randle's hands, in that first year. He was taking the ball out of Jalen Brunson's hands his fourth year. And that's never factored into the equation. These trade-offs all matter in terms of overall team efficiency. And on the topic of efficiency, both player and team, to XJ's point, just the evolution from when Julius Randle's first year as a Knick to now, offense has gone up immensely, and so has efficiency. Efficiency has increased by almost a true shooting percentage point, which is significant. League average true shooting percentage last season was 58%. The highest offensive rating for a team in the NBA last season was like 120 or something, 122 maybe even. The Knicks last season was 117.3. That was barely a top 10 offense in the NBA. That was a good offense, but it wasn't, one of the 5 best offenses in the league. The Knicks' offensive rating last season would have led the NBA Julius Randle's first season. That's only a 4-year difference. That's how much offenses have evolved. So, and this isn't to say that Julius Randle hasn't improved from his first year in New York. Of course he has. But this is just steel manning XJ's point that the threshold for what is a passable possession in the NBA is totally different than it was 10 years ago. And you have to adapt how you view team constructions and roster building to that, because you need to not sink in today's NBA. You need to be such a hyper efficient offense. And there are all these factors that go into that. It's not just what can you do with the ball in your hands? Can you take this guy one-on-one? What's your bag? Offenses have gotten so much better. And I'm going to go back to something that I've been saying for a while now, and I said in this thread, in my opinion, in today's league, to be a part of a team that can win at the highest level, you really need to fall into one of 2 tiers of player. You need to be one of the best players in the league, one of the true stars in the league, maybe top 10 player, or you need to be someone who can be at their best and not diminish what one of those 10 players can do. I don't think you can fall into any other camp. I think you have to be one of those in one of those 2 camps of players. And I'm not saying Julius Randle can't be one of those players, but I think at least the jury's still out, and it's reasonable to question if he can be at 29 years old one of those players. Do you think that's too far-fetched, or is that too extreme?
No, I think it's right. And I think that the answer is probably no. And I just say that I could imagine, and we're good at this. Like, could we imagine a team construction where Julius Randle is kind of the primary initiator, or one of 2 primary initiators that would potentially win a championship? And we could probably come up with something, but it would be,
yeah. If you replaced Brunson with Quickly, or excuse me, I'm being serious. If you replace Brunson with Derek White, just to so my bias isn't showing as much. Replace Brunson with Derek White, and then replace Mitch with like a stretch 5, like prime Brook Lopez. That's a championship team in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. Okay,
if you have Derek White, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, Julius Randle, and prime Brook Lopez, that's a championship team in my opinion. Where Julius Randle is the primary initiator.
And I totally agree with you. And yes, you're right. But what you just did there, and I think this is like very illustrative for our listeners, is that you basically surrounded Julius Randle with like all the highest LUBE players in the entire NBA. And Jeff's laughing because I'm saying LUBE.
You had to say it. Like literally, we make that thread. It gets all we're trying to do is show that Knicks fans are reasonable people who can have NBA discussions across, and that's all we're trying to do. And we just, all people want to talk about is LUBE. I guess that's all they want. I guess I should have known better, but
LUBE as in LUBE, it's a discrete concept that Geoff and I came up with, and it's similar to, in some ways, the scalability concept that people have mentioned. Scalability is, I think, Ben Taylor's concept from Thinking Basketball, and there's similarities, but the idea is just with LUBE is that the traits and skills and abilities that a player brings to the court that are additive to a player who has the ball when they don't have the ball. So that those could come from, largely from 3-point shooting, the threat of 3-point shooting, being able to cut, being able to finish plays, being able to play defense on and off the ball, protect the rim. These are all high LUBE traits. And
think about how cool it would be to come up with a percentage of your impact that basically was always there. That no matter what the circumstance you were in, it was almost a guarantee. That's kind of what we were going for with LUBE. Is like the higher your I can't fucking say it. The higher your LUBE is, the more reliable your impact is. And this is why Julius Randle is such a tricky subject, because we've seen over the course of his Knicks career that the context of his situation hugely alters his impact. He's had almost 2.5 wonderful seasons. The 2021, and for different reasons across different roles, he should absolutely be thanked, praised for these things. The 2021 Knicks were nothing like the 2023 Knicks. He adapted his role. 2021, he basically God moded from mid-range and three. If Knicks fans remember, his true shooting percentage was like around 60, but he shot 40% from three and like 48% from long mid-range. He absolutely God moded, and that drove his overall offensive impact. And by the way, he was doing these on tough shots. He was the whole offense, and the shots just kept going in and in and in. And he fell back to earth as a shooter in 2022. His impact was hurt. The situation changed. Then in 2023, look at his 3-point percentage. What did he shoot from three that year? Actually, 34%.
Yeah,
I
think it was like slightly below league average. Yeah.
But his true shooting percentage was still the same as it was his great first year in New York, because his shot mapping was smarter and he shot better from different areas. All this is to say that Julius Randle actually has shown individual adaptability that maybe he doesn't get enough credit for, but he's still in the macro operating in a way that infringes on other people's ability to be their maximum selves, at least other primary initiators, namely Jalen Brunson. And look, Jalen Brunson was very good his first year in New York, and he was very good to start his second year in New York. But I don't think XJ thinks it's a coincidence that Brunson's offensive brilliance and offensive impact really peaked when Randle was out of the lineup and he was just surrounded with these more additive, high LUBE pieces.
Yeah, I don't think it's a coincidence. And I guess there's a bunch of different ways my brain is going. I guess a question that I would have is, could Randle be a high LUBE player? I mean, Randle has a vast array of offensive skills. As we know, he has shot 41% from three for an entire season in the NBA before. And like you said, those are coming off of very, very difficult shots. Like if his shot diet improved, if he's taking catch and shoot shots, if he spent this summer knowing that he's going to have a healthy Brunson and a healthy Mikal Bridges, realizing that he needs to improve, the spacing that he provides, the off-ball gravity that he provides as well. maybe he's spending the whole summer working on his shot. Maybe he comes back and he can shoot threes at a pretty high clip in terms of open threes, corner threes. Maybe he cuts a lot more. Maybe he's willing to do pick and rolls with Jalen Brunson and aggressively cut to the basket in some 5-out situations. Like, do you think it's possible that Randle could adapt and become a high LUBE player, knowing that the skills that he has as a primary initiator give him an advantage over a lot of higher LUBE players in terms of just all the things that go into playing basketball? So I that's a question that I haven't asked as much because it doesn't seem like Randle's going to want to do that, to be honest, but could he?
So I think physically he definitely can. I think obviously I can't jump inside the mind of Julius Randle, but I think as you watch him across 4 seasons, a trend you really notice is he's a high rhythm player. He really, really likes to feel out situations. He's not a quick processor. He really likes to stop and evaluate what's going on, and he's most comfortable when he's operating off the bounce, when he's got a few of those mid-rangers up under his belt. He's not really the type of player, and honestly, this is a rare trait. This isn't hating on Randle. It's hard to be this type of player, but he's not really the type of player who can just, help his team by playing off the ball and supplying that sort of gravity. And then, a couple possessions go by and he catches and shoots really quickly. I don't think that's ever going to be him. I would be very surprised if that was ever him. I do want to point out something that DJ Zulo on Twitter talked about today. I do think that you're selling Randle a little bit short on the functional gravity he provides. I know his shooting numbers aren't the best, but I do think and we've talked about this a number of times. We talked about it with Siakam. I know I'm a little bit different here than you. I don't think teams really ignore Randle. I think that they pay him the respect of an all-star. I just don't think it's in these NBA players and even coaches on a human level to say, oh, look, there's Julius Randle. We're just not going to pay attention to him. I think he's garnered enough respect across the league that even if he's not the best mover off the ball, even if he's not, a guy who's moving around the perimeter and floor mapping optimally, I do think that he is creating some semblance of gravity that should be noted. I don't think that, if you look at B-Ball Index and some of these other sites that attempt to quantify it, I don't think he gets crushed in his off-ball impact grades. So that is worth noting. But in terms of being truly a high LUBE player, in terms of being someone who is willing to shoot off the catch for a high percentage of his shots or attack closeouts for a high percentage of his shots, someone who will defend and who will do all these little things, I don't see it. I think it would be best for the Knicks. And if he did take more of one of those roles, and I want to say that I think the best chance for him to become one of those players would be to embrace a 5-out offense more. And the reason I think that is because it would make him feel like he's more involved in the actions if he was the team's primary screener. His impact would become more interactive in the offense. And I think that would get the best out of him. It would put him in these situations where he would feel like he was involved, feel like he was a primary initiator. It would almost trick him into thinking that his role hadn't changed, that he was still like, oh, it's me and Brunson's team. We're running this super efficient pick and roll. I'm getting all these opportunities attacking the paint. I'm almost like my team's Draymond Green, but the role actually would change because it would become more additive.
Yeah, I love what you said there at the end. I will say about the Julius Randle's off-ball gravity, I think a big factor that people miss is that gravity is often a function of teammate strength. And I think that this is kind of goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning. If a player like Julius Randle is off the ball, it depends on how good the player with the ball is going to dictate how much gravity Julius Randle commands, right? Like, we're going to stay tighter to Julius Randle if the player with the ball is not as big of a threat. And obviously that wouldn't be the case if Brunson has the ball and Randle is off the ball. But I think we see this with Mikal Bridges specifically. Mikal Bridges, I think, he had a very high off-ball gravity, but at the same time, who are the initiators for the Nets that you're so worried about that you're like, oh, we got to bring all of the troops down inside to prevent the Nets from getting to the rim. Spencer Dinwiddie's really going to crush us and take us off the dribble and get it all the way to the hoop and score and get fouled. So therefore, we have to really sink in. Like, of course, you're going to be able to stay further out to Mikal Bridges because you're not worried about whoever has the ball being able to probe and dismantle your interior defense. So all of these things kind of play into one another. Also, I would also say part of the grades that Julius Randle and others get in the B-ball index metrics for like off-ball gravity is how they get covered in actions, which, I think this is subtly but importantly different than true like off-ball / out of action gravity. So if, there's a 2-man game and, teams are going to play Julius Randle in a particular way, that's going to be counted as his off-ball gravity, even though it's like he's technically off the ball because he doesn't have the ball, but he's in the action, which I agree with you. You could totally unlock Julius Randle's gravity and his ability and his skills best if he's involved in the actions. But we don't see Brunson and Randle running pick and rolls like very often. I don't know what the data is on it specifically, but last time I checked, this is not something that happens a lot. And Julius Randle doesn't roll to the basket a ton. A lot of that is because there's a 5 who's kind of sitting there in a dunker spot, waiting to get an offensive rebound from the Knicks. And they don't have and haven't had a true 5-out 5 in a very long time. And if they incorporated that, I could see Randle's value being really, really high. Or if Randle ends up being the token 5 or OG Anunoby ends up being the token 5, I can see his value kind of skyrocketing. And that's why I think some of the ways that the Knicks can deploy their team is going to dictate the value of some of these players that they have and how well they're going to fit together. The last thing I would say is that I think that season-long kind of grades on gravity are not really relevant to me in terms of like for playoff dynamics, because we see all kinds of very extreme types of defensive schemes in playoff situations. And even if we see teams say like, oh, we're going to stay tighter to Julius Randle in the regular season, in the playoffs, that could completely change. And he'll have to knock down shots and make teams pay enough so that they want to get out of a scheme where they're really kind of trying to pack the paint against a guy like Jalen Brunson and slow him down. And so teams' priorities are going to be really aggressively different, in my opinion, in the playoffs than they would be in the regular season. So those are things that we need to look out for. And I know I said that was the last thing I was going to say, but one other thing I thought of was that we just saw the Oklahoma City Thunder trade Josh Giddey for Alex Caruso. And obviously, I don't want to get yelled at. Julius Randle is a much better player than Josh Giddey. I do think there's some similar dynamics there happening where Josh Giddey's best skills are doing stuff with the ball. And Josh Giddey's actually, I think he's really good. I think he will be good in an on-ball capacity, but not good enough such that you're going to want him to have the ball and SGA to not have it. And that's a similar dynamic between Randle and Jalen Brunson. And if Randle's kind of leading that second unit, they stagger Randle and Brunson. There's a lot of things you could do to kind of like maximize the impact that the two have and kind of cater things to Randle as much as possible. But you do have to be very strategic about it. And you do want to have a situation where you do not want to have a situation where Randle is taking the ball away from Jalen Brunson constantly, because you're lowering your offensive efficiency, especially in the half court. I know you mentioned offensive efficiency going through the roof, Geoff. Offensive efficiency obviously considers every way that a team scores. So it includes transition and everything like that. Half court offense is less efficient. So, some of those kind of criteria for where you need to be for those shots to be good shots in the half court a little bit lower than what it would look like from the overall offensive effectiveness that you might see in terms of offensive rating. But at the same time, efficiency is going through the roof. And so for you to be the guy that takes the shots, you're going to have to be getting really, really efficient shots. And I just would trust Jalen Brunson to do that more than I would Julius Randle.
A counter to that, a potential counter at least, that I've seen a lot of people bring up, and I'm just going to throw it right back to you because I think you'll answer this more eloquently than I could. A lot of people say, okay, Jalen Brunson is a better offensive initiator than Julius Randle is. But if you specifically isolate their ability to elevate the other player off ball, I think there's a reasonable argument that actually Randle is better at that than Brunson, and that Brunson is a better shooter off the catch and a more willing mover off the catch. Is there no argument that having that sort of diversity, both from a size perspective and the likely outcome of the possession perspective, is there no argument that, hey, maybe that's where Julius Randle's value comes from? Maybe having that curveball, that because me and you both believe that you don't necessarily need two offensive initiators to make a great offense, but I think we definitely feel that the peak offense is two offensive initiators who are interactive, like Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic. So is it not possible that even though Jalen Brunson surrounded by lots of shooting and him just running the show, a lineup per se of Jalen Brunson, Dante DiVincenzo, Mikal Bridges, and OG Anunoby with a center, is it possible that the best version of the Knicks has Julius Randle because he allows them to say, okay, yeah, Brunson, you're better at getting your own bucket, but Randle actually forces these collapses and creates some of these 3-pointers that we want to shoot better than Jalen Brunson?
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, that argument frames as Jalen Brunson is better at both on-ball and off-ball impact than Randle. And so because of that, and Randle is only, he's clearly better at his on-ball impact than off-ball impact. So we'll put Brunson off the ball. But that's not Brunson's ideal. That's not his ideal role in an offense. And of course he can do it really well. But ideally for me, in terms of team build and team construction, like you said, it would be two players who can kind of play off of one another and be both involved in the action and be maximized in that way. But in lieu of that, in lieu of Brunson and Randle being in actions together a ton, I want my best player to be doing their best thing. I don't want my best player to be doing their second best thing because they also happen to be pretty good at that second best thing too. And so to me, it could work in that way, but I still don't think it's like as perfect as it would be were it not somebody else like a Karl Anthony Towns.
I just want to hop in here, XJ.
Yeah,
I agree that from a synergistic standpoint, it is not as perfect synergistically.
Mm-hmm.
But there are examples of sacrificing synergy for just vacuum impact and talent. And an example I would say is the 2016 Warriors to the 2017 Warriors. I know this is an extreme example. Of course, it's an extreme example. But look, I'm doing my best to take the other side because all we do is agree. So at least I'm going to get you to try to argue with the other side. The 2016 Warriors were a perfectly constructed team. It was one of the greatest offensive players of all time, having his best offensive season in his career, probably the greatest offensive season we've ever seen, surrounded by shooting and defense. Harrison Barnes was the, kind of small forward, power forward. But in their small lineups, Harrison Barnes was the power forward, and they had gone away from what they did a few years ago with Harrison Barnes. Harrison Barnes was almost entirely a spacer in that team. It was Steph Curry's show. They had Klay Thompson. They had Iguodala, who shot lights out that season, if I recall correctly. I think Harrison Barnes even shot 40% that season. Draymond Green wasn't what we know him as now. He was the center in those small ball lineups he was shooting. That was a perfectly synergistic team. And in my opinion, in bringing in Kevin Durant, Steph Curry took a step back, and all the data reflects this. Steph Curry was never as good again as he was in 2016. But I think the Warriors got better. So look, is Jalen Brunson peak Steph Curry? No. Does he have as much room to go down as Steph Curry did and still be as amazing as Steph Curry was? No, of course not. If you just go by EPM, Steph Curry's EPM in 2016 was 10.5. His offensive EPM was a bonkers 9, +9. One of the highest EPMs, I think the highest EPM we've ever seen. Jalen Brunson's last year was +6. So this is just, it's different levels here. And Julius Randle is not Kevin Durant. So I'm not claiming this is apples to apples, but I am trying to identify a situation where we sacrifice synergy and the team still improved because the skill and the impact was so high. Is it not possible that Jalen Brunson being 95% of himself with the available options, it's still just better to have 95% of Jalen Brunson with 95% of Julius Randle than it would be to have 100% of Jalen Brunson and 100% of somebody else, again, with the available options.
Yeah, that's absolutely possible. I wouldn't argue against that at all. We got to get out of here because we got to keep it a hot hand mini, but I'm going to say something probably insane and blasphemous and that people are going to hate. So what other way can we do it here? So Kevin Durant, like you said, filled in for Harrison Barnes, one of the best players in the league. The riches of talent was ridiculous, of course. Maybe it wasn't as good a fit, maybe as Harrison Barnes. I would argue probably just as good a fit and just a talent upgrade. But do you think, I'll ask you, and maybe you'll say this is crazy. I think the Warriors would have been better if they would have added Paul George at that time than if they added Kevin Durant.
God damn, dude. Can they have 2019 Paul George? Do they have to have 2016 Paul George?
No,
2019
Paul George at that time, and everyone would agree Kevin Durant's a better player than Paul George. No one would say. I don't think anybody would argue that 2017 Kevin Durant or 2016 Kevin Durant is not as good as Paul George was, but I think they'd be better if they had Paul George instead of Kevin Durant.
This opens up such another can of worms. I think specifically what Durant brought, if you go back and watch those 2016 finals, the Cavs found something against that Warriors team. That Cavs defense was locked in on stopping Steph Curry. I invite anyone else who's listening to this to go watch those finals. Steph Curry didn't have a great finals, and it wasn't just taking Steph Curry away. It was all those pet Warriors actions with Steph off the ball. Steph and Clay, I forget what that action's called, where Steph and Clay like screen for each other and then one cuts to the basket and one pops out for the three. It's just like that pet play where they'd either always get a backdoor layup or an open three. All these actions, Iman Shumpert, even J.R. Smith, LeBron had them and Ty Lue had them locked in. What Kevin Durant gave them that I don't think that Paul George would give them to nearly the same degree. When the Warriors stuff didn't work, their secondary option was the best one-on-one player in the league at that time. And I think that was a vital addition to that team that I don't think Paul George would give them that. I get the spirit of what you're saying. I don't agree. I think Kevin Durant was so good, and that specific additive skill was so important to specifically winning a championship against Cleveland that I think that Kevin Durant was better than Paul George, even for that team. But I understand the spirit behind what you're saying.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. It's a totally fair perspective. And like you said, it's opening up a whole nother can of words that we can go down on in a future episode of Hot Hand Theory. Thank you all for joining and listening to our first episode of Hot Hand Minis. And, if you made it all the way through, why not drop a subscription? We have conversations like this all the time, and we will be also doing that throughout the summer. So, please subscribe if you can, drop a like, drop a comment. We engage with every single comment that goes on down below. If you look at our past videos, you'll see this is definitely true. But yeah, for Geoff and for XJ, this has been Hot Hand Mini.